thought it was a warning, but it turned out to be the beginning of the end.
Fire! Fire!
We observe. We are acting. You have to decide.
Salvation requires sacrifice.
Dr. Maren Kyle adjusted her headset, the faint hum of the signal filling her ears like a haunting melody. It had been weeks since the anomaly was first detected, and she had spent every waking moment piecing together its intricacies. The signal wasn't a simple transmission. It was layered, dense with mathematical precision and strange, almost organic patterns that seemed to pulse with life. The lab around her was a mess. Coffee-stained papers covered every surface, interspersed with jagged printouts of waveforms and spectrograms. A half-eaten sandwich sat forgotten near the edge of her desk, its bread curling in the dry, recycled air. Her colleagues had long since gone home, their enthusiasm dulled by the enigma's sheer complexity. Maren, however, was enthralled. The signal wasn't just a puzzle, it felt like a conversation waiting to happen. The latest sequence flashed across her monitor, an intricate lattice of repeating symbols that defied easy interpretation. Maren leaned in closer, her eyes burning from hours of squinting at the screen. The symbols felt familiar, like something buried deep in her subconscious. She traced the patterns with her finger, a knot forming in her stomach. It wasn't random. There was intent here, a purpose she couldn't quite grasp. "Kyle," came a voice from behind her. She jumped, nearly knocking her coffee onto the keyboard. It was Daniel Shu, her colleague from the physics department, his face lined with exhaustion. "You're still at it?" he asked, glancing at the chaotic workstation. "You're going to burn yourself out." "I'm close," she said, ignoring his concern. "There's something here. It's not just noise, it's layered like a symphony." Shu sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I know you think this is a breakthrough, but every analysis we've run says it's just interference. Maybe some naturally occurring." "It's not interference," Maren snapped, louder than she intended. She took a deep breath, lowering her voice. "Sorry, but I know I'm right about this. Just listen." She hit a key, and the lab filled with the sound of the signal. It was haunting, long, resonant tones interspersed with sudden bursts of static that almost sounded like whispers. Shu frowned, leaning closer to the speaker. "Okay," he admitted. "It's weird. I'll give you that. It's more than weird." Maren's fingers danced across the keyboard. "Look at this." She pulled up a series of spectrograms, each one more intricate than the last. "These aren't random patterns. They're structured, repeating. And this," she highlighted a section. "This is a prime number sequence. Someone, something built this." Shu stared at the screen, his skepticism giving way to unease. "If you're right, then who the hell sent it? And why?" Maren hesitated, the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but there's more." She clicked another file, and the monitor displayed a sequence of images extracted from the signal. At first glance, they seemed abstract, fractal-like shapes and swirling colors. But as the sequence played out, a pattern emerged, a star chart, anatomical diagrams of unfamiliar creatures, and finally, a string of symbols that almost resembled writing. "That last part," Maren said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is a message. I'm sure of it." Sue crossed his arms, his unease deepening. "A message for who?" Maren didn't answer. She stared at the screen, the symbols etched into her mind. They felt alive, as though they were watching her, waiting for her to understand. She had been on edge for days, plagued by a growing sense of being observed. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. "You should get some sleep," Sue said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This can wait." Maren shook her head. "I'll sleep when I figure this out." Shu left her alone in the lab, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. Maren sat in the silence, the signal's hum still lingering in the air. She replayed the sequence again and again, searching for something she might have missed. Then she heard it. It was faint, buried beneath the layers of sound, a rhythmic, guttural noise that didn't match any known pattern. Her pulse quickened as she isolated the segment, amplifying it until it filled the room. It sounded almost like breathing. Maren's hands trembled as she adjusted the frequency. The sound grew clearer, more distinct. It wasn't a recording. It was live. Her heart pounded as she leaned closer to the speaker, her breath fogging the screen. The breathing grew louder, accompanied by faint, wet clicks, like the sound of shifting joints or muscles. And then, as she stared into the glowing monitor, the breathing stopped. The lab fell silent, the hum of the signal suddenly absent. Maren froze, her finger hovering over the keyboard. Then, without warning, the screen went black, and a single line of text appeared. "We watch. We act. You will decide." Maren's stomach turned as the lights flickered, plunging the lab into darkness. The world held its breath as the object appeared in the sky. It was impossible to miss, a shimmering, bioluminescent mass that stretched across the heavens like an otherworldly aurora. News outlets struggled to keep up as images and videos flooded social media, showing the object pulsing with light, its translucent, jelly-like tendrils reaching down toward Earth as if tasting the air. Governments scrambled to respond. Air traffic was grounded, military forces went on high alert, and emergency broadcasts flooded every screen and speaker. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Maren Kyle sat frozen in her chair, staring at the live feed from a satellite. The object was enormous, dwarfing even the largest aircraft carriers, and its movement was unnervingly organic. It hovered just outside the atmosphere, its surface rippling as though alive. The alien signal had stopped hours earlier, leaving a silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Maren's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic tangle of fear and fascination. This was no coincidence. The object's arrival and the signal were linked. Two pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. A knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. It was Daniel Shu again, his face pale and drawn. "They want us at the base," he said, his voice tight. "All of us. Now." Maren grabbed her coat, her hands trembling as she followed him outside. The drive to the military base was surreal, the streets eerily empty. Overhead, the object loomed, casting an unearthly glow that made the city look like it was underwater. When they arrived, the base was a hive of activity. Soldiers barked orders, scientists hurried between makeshift labs, and high-ranking officials debated furiously in glass-walled conference rooms. Marin and her team were ushered into a briefing room, where a general with a gravelly voice addressed them. "The object has made no hostile moves," he began, his expression grim. "But it's emitting a low-frequency vibration that matches the signal Dr. Kyle and her team have been studying. Whatever this thing is, it's alive and it's trying to communicate." A murmur rippled through the room. Marin felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. She had known the signal was more than noise, but this confirmation came with a weight she wasn't prepared for. The general continued, his tone growing darker. "An entity has emerged from the object. It's requesting contact. We've prepared a secure location for the meeting, and we need your expertise to interpret whatever it has to say." Marin's stomach turned. The idea of meeting whatever was inside that thing felt like stepping into a nightmare. But before she could voice her concerns, the general motioned for them to follow him. The secure location turned out to be a hangar, its walls lined with cameras and equipment. At the center of the room, surrounded by heavily armed soldiers, was the visitor. Marin stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The creature was unlike anything she had ever seen. It stood over 7 feet tall, its body a translucent, gelatinous mass that constantly shifted and reformed. Through its skin, she could see pulsating organs and what appeared to be veins carrying luminescent fluid. Its face, or what passed for one, was a featureless plane save for 2 dark, ovoid indentations that seemed to regard the room with eerie calm. The alien emitted a low hum, the same rhythm as the signal. The sound resonated in Marin's chest, making her feel lightheaded. A technician approached it cautiously, holding a device designed to translate its vibrations into human speech. As the alien's hum grew louder, the device crackled to life. "We come to assist," it said, its voice distorted and inhuman. "Your star will betray you. We offer protection." The room fell silent. Marin's mind reeled. The alien's words confirmed her worst fears. The solar flare she had suspected, the extinction event she had tried to warn others about, was real. But before she could process this revelation, the alien spoke again. "In exchange," it said, "we require volunteers." The word hung in the air like a death knell. A wave of unease rippled through the crowd. Marin glanced at Shu, who looked as though he might be sick. The alien continued, its hum growing more intense. "Biological compatibility studies," it said. "Your kind adapts. We must ensure survival." Marin's chest tightened. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. What kind of studies? What did adapt mean? But her voice felt trapped in her throat. The alien's form shimmered, its tendrils twitching in a way that felt almost impatient. The general stepped forward, his voice firm but uneasy. "We need time to consider your proposal." The alien tilted its featureless head, the dark indentations seeming to focus on him. "Time is fleeting. Decide soon." With that, it turned and retreated toward the far end of the hangar, its gelatinous form rippling as it moved. A door slid open, revealing a tunnel of light that led back to the massive, hovering object. The alien disappeared into the glow, leaving the room in stunned silence. Marin's mind raced as she stared at the empty space where the alien had stood. The implications of its words were staggering. It claimed to offer salvation, but at what cost? And what did it mean by biological compatibility? The phrase conjured images she didn't want to dwell on, images of experiments, of bodies reshaped and broken. As the hangar buzzed with frantic discussion, Marin felt a deep, gnawing dread. The signal had been the beginning, a harbinger of something far worse. Whatever the alien's true intentions were, she was certain of one thing. Humanity's choice would not come without consequences. The air inside the alien craft was thick, humid, and alive. Marin Kyle could feel the walls pulsing faintly beneath her fingertips, the organic texture damp and yielding. The delegation had been aboard the vessel for less than an hour, and already the oppressive atmosphere was taking its toll. Every breath felt labored, every sound muffled, as though the ship itself were swallowing their voices. The volunteers, 12 men and women, stood in a tight cluster, their nervous chatter dwindling to uneasy silence. Each wore a uniform that matched their assigned roles. Engineers, biologists, linguists. Marin had been given the title of observer, though she suspected it was little more than a euphemism for sacrifice. The alien who had addressed them earlier, its shifting body glowing faintly in the dim light, now guided them deeper into the ship's labyrinthine interior. The corridors twisted unnaturally, branching and converging in ways that defied logic. Marin couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was rearranging itself as they moved, her mental map unraveling with each step. The walls glowed faintly with a bioluminescent sheen, casting eerie shadows that danced across the group. The alien stopped abruptly, turning to face them. Its featureless head tilted slightly, the faint hum of its voice vibrating through the walls. "This is where the work begins." A section of the wall dissolved, revealing a large chamber bathed in pale greenish light. The floor was covered in a viscous fluid that seemed to ripple as they stepped inside. Suspended above them were dozens of strange pods, each one translucent and filled with an opaque liquid. Marin squinted, her stomach lurching as she realized what was inside. Human figures, distorted and half-formed. Limbs twisted at unnatural angles, skin stretched taut over bulging growths, and faces frozen in expressions of agony. One of the volunteers, a young biologist named Jess, let out a strangled gasp. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing away from the pods. What is this?" The alien's hum grew louder, its tone almost soothing. Adaptation, preservation, necessary for survival. Marin felt bile rise in her throat. "You said this was for compatibility studies," she said, her voice shaking. "You never mentioned this." The alien turned toward her, its featureless head tilting again. "This is study. Your biology is resilient, mutable. We seek to integrate." "Integrate?" Marin repeated, her voice rising. "You're experimenting on them. You're turning them into things." The alien stepped closer, its massive form casting a shadow over her. "Survival requires sacrifice. Your kind will endure. We will endure." Before Marin could respond, The floor beneath them shuddered, the rippling fluid surging upward like a tide. The volunteers stumbled, their protests lost in the sudden cacophony of noise. Pods descended from the ceiling, their contents writhing against the translucent barriers. One of the pods split open with a wet, tearing sound, spilling its contents onto the floor. A hybrid creature, its twisted body half human, half alien. It moved sluggishly, its malformed limbs twitching as it emitted a low, guttural moan. The room erupted into chaos. One of the soldiers accompanying the group raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a tendril shot out from the wall, piercing his chest. He collapsed, his blood mingling with the viscous fluid on the floor. The alien turned to the remaining group, its voice cutting through the panic like a blade. Resistance is wasteful, except transformation. Maren grabbed Jess's arm, pulling her away from the center of the room. "We need to get out of here," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Jess nodded, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. Together they pushed through the crowd, dodging tendrils that lashed out from the walls. The ship seemed to come alive, its organic surfaces pulsing and shifting as though reacting to their fear. They stumbled into a smaller corridor, the sounds of screams and wet, tearing flesh fading behind them. Maren leaned against the wall, her chest heaving. Jess was trembling, her hands clutching at her sides as though trying to hold herself together. "This isn't protection," Jess said, her voice cracking. This is annihilation." Maren nodded, her mind racing. The images she had seen in the signal, the anatomical diagrams, the cryptic warnings. They hadn't been an offer of salvation. They had been blueprints for assimilation. "We have to warn the others," Maren said. "We have to stop this." Before Jess could respond, the corridor shuddered violently. A section of the wall split open, revealing another chamber. Maren's blood ran cold as she saw what lay within, rows of pods, each one containing a volunteer. They were awake, their eyes wide with terror as the fluid inside began to bubble and churn. One of the volunteers, a man Maren recognized as a physicist named Carter, locked eyes with her. His mouth moved, forming words that were muffled by the liquid. Then, slowly, his body began to change. His skin darkened, turning translucent, and his limbs elongated, his bones bending in impossible ways. Maren turned away, unable to watch. "We're not just volunteers," she said, her voice hollow. "We're raw material." The realization hit her like a blow. The aliens weren't here to save humanity. They were here to remake it, to harvest and reshape it into something unrecognizable. A voice echoed through the corridor, deep and resonant. It wasn't the alien. They were speaking directly to the ship itself. "You cannot escape. You are part of the process." Maren clenched her fists, her fear giving way to a cold determination. If they were going to survive, they needed to find a way off the ship. But even as she formulated a plan, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The aliens' work had begun, and humanity was no longer in control of its own destiny. Maren Kyle stood at the edge of the abyss, her breath shallow as she stared at the pulsating heart of the alien ship. The chamber was vast and cathedral-like, its bioluminescent walls casting sickly green light across the writhing mass of tendrils and veins that converged in the central node. The heart wasn't a metaphor. It beat with an audible rhythm, a grotesque organ of fused flesh and alien matter that seemed to pulse in time with her own racing heartbeat. Behind her, Jess clung to the wall, her face pale and streaked with tears. The other survivors, what few remained, huddled together, their eyes reflecting both terror and the faint, disquieting glow of the ship. Maren could feel the ship watching them, its walls quivering like a living creature anticipating a meal. The alien leader stepped forward, its gelatinous form shimmering with an otherworldly light. Its voice filled the chamber, a resonant hum that seemed to bypass her ears and vibrate directly in her skull. "Your kind faces extinction," it said, its tone almost mournful. "We offer continuation, a new form of life." Maren clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "This isn't life," she spat. "It's a nightmare." The alien tilted its featureless head, the dark indentations where its eyes might have been locking onto her. "Survival is adaptation. Without us, you perish." Maren's mind raced. The solar flare, the event the aliens had warned about, was imminent. The atmosphere would ignite, oceans would boil, and Earth would become an uninhabitable wasteland. The aliens weren't lying about that, but their solution wasn't salvation. It was assimilation. Humanity wouldn't be saved, it would be consumed, twisted into something unrecognizable. "We didn't ask for this," Maren said, her voice trembling with rage. "You created this disaster. You forced us into this." The alien didn't deny it. "We act to survive. Your planet is the last." The survivors murmured behind her, their fear palpable. Jess stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Maren, if we don't accept, we'll all die. The Earth will." "I know what will happen," Maren interrupted, her gaze never leaving the alien. "But this isn't a choice. It's extinction either way." Her hand tightened around the vial in her pocket. The pathogen, a desperate gamble she had concocted in the ship's makeshift lab, was untested. If it worked, it would spread through the ship's biological systems, attacking its living tissue like a virus. But it wouldn't stop the solar flare. It wouldn't save Earth. It was a choice between death by fire or death by assimilation. "Your time is gone," the alien said, its voice tinged with what almost sounded like pity. "Choose life." Maren took a step forward, her heart pounding. "You talk about survival, but you're no better than the extinction you claim to save us from. You're parasites, and I'd rather burn with my world than let you take it." She hurled the vial at the heart of the ship. The glass shattered on impact, the liquid inside splattering across the pulsating surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the heart convulsed violently, a deep, guttural roar reverberating through the chamber as the pathogen began its work. The walls quivered, their bioluminescence flickering erratically. The tendrils that had seemed so alive moments ago now writhed in agony, their movements jerky and uncontrolled. The survivors screamed as the ship's structure began to collapse, chunks of organic matter falling from the ceiling and splattering onto the floor. The alien turned toward Maren, its form destabilizing, parts of its body sloughing off like melting wax. "You condemn us," it said, its voice fractured and distorted. "You condemned yourselves," Maren replied, backing toward the exit as the chamber collapsed around her. You thought you could play God. The alien reached toward her, its outstretched tendril quivering before it fell limp. The chamber shuddered violently, and Marin turned, grabbing Jess's arm and pulling her toward the others. "Move!" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the dying ship. They ran through the collapsing corridors, the ship's organic walls breaking apart to reveal raw, skeletal structures beneath. The bioluminescence dimmed with each passing second, plunging the interior into a suffocating darkness. Marin led the group, her lungs burning as she pushed herself forward. Behind her, the ship's final death throes echoed like the wails of a dying beast. They reached the docking chamber just as the last of the aliens' defenses crumbled. The escape pods, organic capsules lined with the same viscous fluid as the ship, were their only hope. Marin hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on the pulsating tendrils that cradled the pods. She didn't trust them, but there was no time to reconsider. "Get in!" she shouted, shoving Jess toward one of the pods. The survivors scrambled inside, the pod sealing shut with a wet, organic hiss. Marin climbed into the last one, her heart hammering as the pod's interior closed around her. A moment later, she felt a jolt as the pod was ejected from the ship, hurtling into space. Through the translucent walls, Marin watched as the alien vessel imploded. Its bioluminescence flared one final time, a sickly green explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the void. The light faded, leaving only darkness. For a moment there was silence. Then, from her pod's communication system, a voice crackled through, human, distant, and panicked. "Ground control to escape pods. The solar flare has started. Impact in 2 hours. Prepare for re-entry." Marin closed her eyes, the weight of her actions settling over her. She had destroyed the aliens, but the Earth's fate was unchanged. The flare would come, and humanity would have to face it alone. As the pods began their descent, she glanced at her reflection in the fluid around her. Her skin shimmered faintly, the bioluminescent mark of her time aboard the alien ship. A reminder that she had survived, but not unscathed. And as the first fiery tendrils of the solar flare licked at the atmosphere, Marin wondered if humanity's fight for survival had only just begun.